Ah, I love this town. A city of endless opportunity and brotherly hate. But if you got the cojones and you know how to use them, you can do damn near anything.
Unless you catch a bullet, stray or not.
Even then, you go out with a bang, right? And the street'll talk. The street'll remember. It's a win-win.
Hey everyone, it's One Dragon back with another Cyberpunk 2077 video, and today I'd like to share my tips for experiencing the Cyberpunk story. Before I discuss my tips, like always, play however you want, and there are plenty of people with extremely different experiences of the story and perspectives. Personally, my first playthrough, I went in blind, intentionally avoiding watching any of the hype or concept art videos, and I only watched maybe 20 to 30 seconds of the trailer with Dexter Shawn in it because of poor experiences with movie trailers spoiling or foreshadowing the whole story. So the topics I'll be discussing today will be main jobs, side jobs, and gigs. Can you experience everything in one playthrough? Impacts of life paths. Does the game have a branching storyline? And finally, game balance and its impact on storytelling. In terms of spoilers, I'll do my best to keep spoilers to a minimum throughout, and there will be times where I will give examples from the first act or side missions from the first act as evidence for my points. Although main jobs clearly advance the story, side jobs directly impact the main story, unlocking alternate endings, new dialogue lines, and interaction. Additionally, the romances will also be available in side jobs, so for many, they aren't really side missions or side quests that you typically see in other games, and can be considered crucial parts of the story. Gigs are further down the list, and a couple have an impact on the main story as well in terms of providing alternate dialogue or different methods to complete some of the main missions themselves. A lot of changes that you make through the world through completing both side jobs and the main story will be reflected in the news, the loading screens, and in sometimes your decisions will result in people or enemies being permanently removed or just dying completely. When you complete quests, there will be multiple ways of proceeding. The two obvious ones are stealth versus guns blazing, and other times they'll just be pure dialogue decisions that can bypass any combat whatsoever. Completing gigs stealthily often has unique results and options. A common example includes being able to negotiate with characters who would otherwise immediately be hostile if you were to eliminate everybody in the area. Being stealthy prevents reinforcements from arriving and may be requested from fixers for specific reasons. Since there are no reinforcements, there's also slightly less experience and loot. Similarly, there are consequences for lethal and non-lethal takedowns. A fixer might request for a person to be zeroed, while some characters might prefer you spare the lives of others, and this will have a range of impacts as to how those characters treat you. So my definite advice here is to save lots in case of bugs, and to try different variations of the quests. Just keep in mind that many quests will have consequences significantly further down the line, and their impact is not always realized immediately. This brings me to the interesting topic of, can you experience everything in one run? For me, the simple answer to this is no. To answer this question, we need to discuss life paths and branching storylines. If you listen to the current reviews, articles, or video essays on the game, a lot of them will tell you that life paths only provide a unique prologue, they converge early on, and that there's only one unique mission. These are all true, but the problem is that the critique often stops there, and little time is spent exploring how they impact existing missions. Evidence for this is clearly seen when you look up guides for some of the early gigs in Act 1. They often lack the unique life path solutions. As an example, I'll be using the side gig Woman of La Mancha. In this gig, you have to convince a cop to drop her investigation as it's tied to corrupt cops who pay a fixer. There are multiple avenues to complete this side gig. Finding her yourself and sneaking in without talking to anyone, getting the information of her location by paying or by your reputation, and life path unique options. Street Kid allows you to get the information for free,
You're telling me you're harboring a badge while operating at a Tiger Claw turf?
I wouldn't. I swear it.
I believe you. But them? You know what they do to liars? Slice their digits off. Clean. Sometimes they even go further than that.
All right, I get it. Girls are renting out a room in this here motel. Right over there.
Whilst Nomad also allows you to get the information for free and provides an alternate solution to the problem.
Who the hell's asking?
I'm a backer.
Well. Two nomads crossing paths in Night City. How can I help?
The real bitch of it is, I do care.
If you're a woman of principle, this ain't your city. Be better to skip town, join a nomad clan. They're like you, believing in something more.
They wouldn't accept me.
They will. As a nomad myself, I know they need people like you. More than you know.
Well then what, huh? Smuggle illicit tech? Patch up solar panels?
You'll have family. Won't be alone in this anymore.
Family? You serious?
I am. Anna, you'll have people you can depend on, who won't stab you in the back.
There's even an option to get the information for free based on your street cred.
I do know you. You're that fixer fairy, making waves.
Do what I can.
This woman, she knows how to ruffle feathers. But she's a good person. That clear?
She doesn't step on a ripper's toes.
My business ain't your concern. She's staying in the hotel, 3rd floor, room 303. She's a good person.
The fact is, as I'm writing this, none of the guides have all of the life path specific options, and many of the prominent ones have neither. There are a couple of wikis that have been updated, but a lot of the older guides have not. Another very crucial thing that life paths add is unique perspectives and motivations. There are many points in the story where this is true, but to limit spoilers, I will provide the example of the heist. After you put the pieces of the heist together, you have a meeting with Dex, T-Bug, and Jackie. Yes, everyone goes through this. However, the corporate life path may have a different reason for doing the heist if you select it. For most, it is about the money.
The real reason we're all here.
Now's a good time as any. Fresh talent gets 30% always. But I'm willing to make an exception in your case. I'm gonna cut you a nice juicy 40 as a bonus for your honesty, V.
That's more like it, Dex.
Ka-ching, baby.
For others, it is about the
It is not ever
challenge.
most important, Jack.
Yeah, right. Are you out of your fucking mind, V?
Interesting. So what does qualify as most important?
It's about the challenge. Always.
Look at you youngins making us old folk look bad.
It can also be
Want what
about
everyone
being
with the damn
remembered
wants.
and becoming
Be
a legend.
remembered. People, after hours, place like this, 50 years on, talking about what I pulled off.
You want to build cred, your rep, with you 100 on that. Respect. Cut you 35 for that alone.
But for the corpo, it can be about revenge.
Thinking Arasakas do a little payback. Overdue.
Old wounds have yet to heal, huh?
This clear change in perspective and motivation for me changed the story, especially combined with the next section of the video. Branching storylines. Does Cyberpunk have branching storylines? The simple answer to this is yes. For those that don't know, towards the end of the story there is a point of no return. This signals the start of the ending and is essentially a reset point that you can return to after you complete an ending. As mentioned previously, there are multiple endings, and here's where you can experience the ones that you've unlocked. For some, the fact that there are multiple endings and multiple romances is not enough for branching storylines, and they want consequences for their decisions. I present to you my evil playthrough. I wanted to see if I could effectively lock myself out of all endings but one, and I was successful. problem is that it involves betraying some of the most interesting characters and at times failing missions. Your decisions can result in the death of a few of the characters before the end, and those characters are crucial to the end as well. Similarly, you can choose to romance characters or complete the story romance free. For me, romancing characters had a fairly big impact on the ending in terms of decision making and meaning. So the fact that you have some choice there is very, very important. I'll likely do a spoiler video of this in future, but my evil playthrough was a combination of the corporate life path, isolating myself from all endings but one, and failing romances and friendships. It was a completely different story than my other playthroughs despite having similar events. This brings me to Johnny Silverhand. Johnny Silverhand is probably one of the most important characters in Cyberpunk's story so far, and interestingly is a really polarizing character that sparks a lot of debate. Every time I do a new playthrough, I do my best to reset my opinion of him and make a judgment of his character based on the dialogue that I experience in that particular playthrough. At the end of Act 1, Silverhand becomes an ever-present character in a lot of the missions, side jobs, and gigs. One thing to keep in mind is that if you complete the missions and gigs in Watson before the heist, you will not have him making an appearance in those missions. Also, since you get to play as Johnny Silverhand, decisions you make as him will also be reflected in the story. If you go to your journal and read the description for all the jobs and gigs, you'll notice that the perspective had changed from that of Jackie to Johnny Silverhand in Act 2. Towards the end of Act 1, you get to play as Johnny Silverhand and go through his memories. In some cases, you will use those memories against him, and rightfully so. However, Johnny Silverhand also has access to your memory, and later down the line in the story, depending on your decisions, he may or may not use the decisions that you make against you. Game balance and its impact on storytelling. In my opinion, game balance in Cyberpunk did and continues to do a disservice to the telling of the story, but this was just from my perspective and the builds that I was using. There are a lot of factors like player skill and difficulty to keep in mind, but my favorite playthrough was still my first. I was very, very afraid of a Skyrim-esque experience where by doing too many side quests, you would become overpowered and find everything extremely easy. But at the same time, many of the side quests seemed really interesting, so it was difficult to find some sort of balance. Personally, I was very conscious about the difficulty labels on the missions and did my best to complete at least the main story jobs on moderate before they hit low. I also decided that in my first playthrough of Cyberpunk, it would be a low attribute and perk run. By that I mean I would avoid spending the majority of my perks and attributes until I needed them or wanted them. Most of my attributes were spent that I could have access to certain dialogue lines. I also avoided upgrading my iconic weapons, analyzing the perk trees, and this resulted in fairly long firefights with enemies, and 3 of the boss fights were lengthy but in a good way. I got to listen to their dialogue lines and appreciate most of their mechanics due to not defeating them in less than 5 seconds. However, once I applied my attributes and perks to a pretty questionable attribute spread, I was able to defeat bosses in a couple minutes or less. During subsequent playthroughs, when I decided to min-max, it became 5 to 20 seconds for the same bosses. In the current patch, it's more like 2 seconds. Last patch, it was already too fast for the enemies to finish their dialogue lines, and this patch, unfortunately, it is worse. Personally, I hope that balance changes will be made in the future. As I mentioned earlier, I believe that the state of balance does a disservice to telling the story. And a big part of this is that you don't know that you're overpowered until it's too late. This is further exemplified when you reach the point of no return. It states when you enter, you will be locked out of all unfinished side jobs and other activities like gigs, If you have any unfinished business, settle it before the meeting. If you were to complete all of the side gigs and side jobs, you would be significantly overpowered for the ending, and your experience of it might not be as challenging as if you were to go in at a lower level. So, if you consider the difficulty of bosses to be an important part of the story, and want to have that satisfaction of defeating a tough enemy, my advice is to be wary of min-maxing. Possibly make a set of clothing or weapons, or both, that are fairly weak, because at some point your build and all the multipliers add up to excessive damage, and for me it downplayed the struggle of fighting against certain bosses. My final recommendation is using photo mode. It's great for capturing important and unique moments throughout the story, and there are many. A lot of the facial expressions are beautifully crafted, and capturing these moments is something that I really enjoyed doing. Not to mention, I even set my difficulty to easy sometimes and captured moments during boss fights. They look amazing with some of the action sequences that they do. Thanks everyone for watching. This has been One Dragon. I will make spoiler versions of these topics in the future, so consider subscribing. I'll see you later, Tubes.
But V, it ain't a matter of luck. You decide. Remember that.